It is SEC Championship game weekend with Missouri taking on Alabama, and while it's a foregone conclusion to many that the Alabama Crimson Tide will walk away with a win there and set up a college football playoff situation for the Tide, a lot of situations will drop into place in terms of bowl projections and what happens if Missouri pulls off the stunner and you got 3 two-loss teams in the SEC. Well, let's talk it over with Hannah Chalker. She just finished up a season covering some Mercer football for ESPN3. You can also catch her on the SEC Fans Radio Network. Hannah, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on. This is a lot of fun. I was telling you before we started going live, I've never done anything like this, an interview on Google Hangouts, so it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it works pretty well. It's worked out pretty well. We're in contact with tons of bloggers and broadcasters all over the place, and so flip a button and here we go. So Alabama, Missouri, Alabama the huge favorite at about 14.5 points right now. So we're going to assume that Alabama moves on to the college football playoff. Things stand as they do right now. Obviously, it's interesting to me that a lot of one-loss teams have to face a lot of two-loss teams in these championship games across the country. And what would happen if all these two-loss teams won, or just a couple of them won? Then we create a huge logjam. So your thoughts about the latest college football rankings with Florida State dropping again, TCU, another one-loss team that has surpassed the Seminoles, and that argument that, well, Florida State's not playing well, but on the other hand, undefeated, and just your thoughts about the way things lay out going into the final weekend.
Yeah, I know Seminole fans are not happy right now with those college football playoff rankings. But this week, I'm liking the AP poll a lot more than I am the college football playoff rankings. You got Alabama 1, FSU 2, Oregon, then TCU at 4, which I don't agree with TCU at 4, because if you look at head-to-head, and I know that the college football playoff rankings like to look at head-to-head a lot, Baylor beat TCU. I know that Baylor lost to West Virginia while TCU beat West Virginia the way they did. But that shouldn't matter in this head-to-head, in my opinion. I think that Baylor should be at the 4 spot. But when you're looking at the college football playoff rankings, with that said, how is TCU 3? It just confuses me, especially with strength of schedule. You know, with the college football playoff rankings, they have Alabama, then Oregon, then TCU, then FSU. I understand FSU has done what they have this season. Some games maybe that they shouldn't have won, but they are undefeated. The only undefeated team left in the FCS. So how are they 4? How is TCU above FSU? A lot of people think that Alabama shouldn't be in that top spot, but this is why I think that they will remain number 1. Obviously, I'm picking them to win the SEC championship. But if you look at Blake Sims, the leader of their offense, he's good at home. He's good at Bryant-Denny Stadium. When he steps away from Tuscaloosa, there's some games that Alabama probably shouldn't have won and have overcome. But when you look at him in Bryant-Denny Stadium, he's great. I put Alabama versus Missouri in Atlanta. Atlanta is home territory for Alabama. They are there so much. They're so successful in the Georgia Dome. That I consider home field advantage for Alabama. Nick Saban and the Tide are comfortable there. So I see Alabama remaining number 1. I don't think FSU should be 4. Why are they 4 in the college football playoff rankings? Someone tell me. I know Seminole fans are so mad about that. So I'm going with AP Top 25 this week. I've been very verbal about that. What do you think?
Hannah, where have you been? Where have you been? Finally, I get a reasonable person on here talking to me. This is great. Okay, my argument for TCU Baylor is exactly what you just stated.
What?
I think we play these games for a reason, don't we? I don't think after the Super Bowl's played that everybody scratches their head on Monday morning and says, you know what? I think the Packers are better than the Patriots. Even though they lost yesterday, let's award them the Super Bowl championship. I just think they're better. And if they played again on a neutral field again, they'd win.
Mm-hmm.
And the other backing I have for that argument is I understand the resume comparison. So let's take a hypothetical situation. Let's say Florida State and Oregon played in week 1 or week 2. Mm-hmm. And let's say Florida State played at home. It was a great game, really close game, 61-58, if anybody can match that score. 61-58, Florida State wins. Mm-hmm. So for the next 10 or 11 weeks, Oregon trounces through the Pac-12. And everybody agrees the Pac-12 is great. And Florida State beats everybody by 1 point in the ACC, and everybody agrees that the ACC is horrible. Okay? I would still argue they both have 11-1 records. Florida State won the head-to-head. They should be ranked higher. I would at least understand the argument, though. Oregon's got the better track record against the better schedule. They've looked more impressive. I would at least understand. I wouldn't agree with it, but I would understand it. In this situation, you've got two teams, and we couldn't pick two teams that are more easily comparable. They play in the same conference, and it's not like the SEC or the Big Ten where they got much different conference schedules. They play exactly the same schedule in the conference. So they're going to have 9 out of 12 games be exactly the same. And Baylor won the head-to-head. Now, if people are putting that much stock on defeating Minnesota, Minnesota's decent, but come on, you can't do that. And number two, if you look at the way Baylor played against its opponents and TCU within the Big 12, for every West Virginia that you can say, well, Baylor lost by 2 touchdowns, and of course TCU won that game, you can also say that TCU beat Oklahoma by 4, and Baylor blew them out by 34, and that's probably a pretty high standard in the Big 12. Oklahoma. So it's a mixed results in terms of how they performed against the Big 12.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. Even though I'm leaning more towards the AP Top 25 this week than college football playoff rankings, AP still has TCU on there. Why isn't Baylor in the top 4? Look what Art Briles has done with that team this season. They always sneak out of nowhere. I mean, they've been in the top 10. Baylor Bears come out of nowhere every year. Such a great program. They deserve to be in the top 4. They beat TCU. I don't know. I get confused. Sometimes I think we need to bring back the BCS rankings already. And that might be too soon, but I'm still confused. I'm confused by it.
It would be much too soon for me, Hannah, because I hated the BCS as well. But I'll take you through my college football. When you're ready for a good nap, I'll take you through my college football playoff scenario and how I would schedule these teams as well. The Florida State argument, I understand if we're just watching games and they slip by BC and Louisville and on down the line, North Carolina State, and now Notre Dame, who we thought was really good and not so much now. I get they don't look very good. They're undefeated. They're undefeated. They've passed 11, 12 tests now. It's just the ACC actually is not as bad as people think it is. I am always dissing the ACC. That's typically what I do as well. But if you look at, and I broke this down a couple of weeks ago, the SEC went 5-6 against the Power 5 conferences. The ACC went 10-6. Now that doesn't tell the whole story. There's got to be context to it. Who's playing whom? But if you look at the wins and losses from the SEC and the ACC outside of the conference, pretty comparable. It's not like the SEC was playing a bunch of Ohio States and Oregons outside of the conference, and the ACC was playing nobody. They're pretty comparable games. And again, ACC at 10-6, SEC at 5-6. Do I think the ACC is better than the SEC? No, in no way do I think that. But I think the ACC is not quite as bad as we believe it to be.
But we're also speaking about FSU as if they've won the ACC championship. What happens if Georgia Tech upsets FSU in the championship? What happens then? I mean, look what they did against Georgia at home in Sanford Stadium. So there is so much that can happen there. That Georgia Tech team is hungry to beat FSU. And if Jameis Winston, I don't know, throws a couple picks, you never know what can happen with that, especially their triple option on the other side of the ball. Their triple option offense is very hard to defend. So they've got a lot of weapons on offense and on defense, and I think that it'll be a great game, a great matchup, and we could see FSU even knocked off. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm picking FSU in the game, but with a team that's an underdog like they are, that's so good at coming back and fighting back, that's going to be a great matchup. So FSU has definitely got to show up there first and foremost, but why they're number 4 on college football rankings is so beyond me. Like I've been saying, Seminole fans are not happy.
And I think that's a great point, Hannah, because Georgia Tech has not been a factor the entire season, completely off the radar. Now they make this run that, of course, they've got to win the championship game. that would be Clemson, Georgia, Florida State, 3 consecutive weeks. That's a pretty good run, and they would sit there at 12-2. Now I think it's ludicrous, or people think it is. Well, they can't jump from 11-4. It can't happen. Well, almost all those teams between them and that 4 spot are sitting on the sideline. Plus, it's defeating an undefeated team, the only one in the country, and the 4th-ranked team, or on some polls, the number 1 ranked team in the country. So why not? Depending on what happens elsewhere, of course. Why not are they not brought into the discussion? Now, I got another one for you, Hannah. What if Missouri pulls the shocker?
That's what I was going to say. Speaking of a team jumping from 11 into the top 4, what if Missouri, which I don't think this is going to happen, comes out and beats Alabama in the Georgia Dome this Saturday? Wow, that sneaks up. That's tomorrow, isn't it? God, the season flies by. What happens? Do we see, so say Missouri comes out, beats Alabama, do we see a number 14 ranking jump up to number 4? Or do we not have an SEC team in the college football playoffs when we had 3, no, I say we, when the conference had 3 in the very first college football rankings? You had Ole Miss, Mississippi State at 1, and then Auburn was at 3. I mean, if Missouri beats Alabama, do we have an SEC team in the college football playoffs? Can Missouri jump from 14-4? What do you think?
Okay, I think that Alabama is still going to get the nod, unless they just go out there and Missouri wins at 41-10, something that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Let's say Alabama loses 28-27. I think they're going to drop from like 1-4. And again, it's contingent on what happens elsewhere. So unless there's complete chaos elsewhere, let's say there's one upset elsewhere. So we've got TCU, they're almost assuredly in. Oregon holds serve. Let's say Ohio State loses and Florida State wins. I think those are your other 3. I think there's going to be the decision actually between Baylor and TCU, and Alabama's still going to get in. I just see them only dropping from 1-4. Do I think that's right? Not necessarily. The argument I've thrown out there, and people think it's a bit off the map and a bit of a reach, is I put a whole lot of stock in that SEC championship. And I know that the East is not as good as the West, but you play a championship for a reason. You play a championship game for a reason. And Missouri and Alabama do have 3 like opponents in the conference. Tennessee, Arkansas, and Texas A&M. And aside from Alabama's 59-0 shellacking on Texas A&M, the other 2 performances are very comparable in regards to Mizzou's performance against those other 2 teams in Alabama. There's not a whole lot of difference there. So they do have 3 like opponents. Mizzou would have defeated the number 1 team in the country head-to-head, won the SEC championship, the power-ranked number 1 conference in the nation, only have 2 losses at 12-2. Unless Ohio State, Florida State, and everybody else holds serve, I think Missouri should get strong consideration.
I agree with you. I hold a lot of stock in the SEC championship, too, and I think everyone should. It's the toughest championship, in my opinion, out of all the conferences, especially when you look at what the West does every year. They beat up on each other. That's why there's not more SEC teams in the top 4 right now, is because they're all killing each other and knocking each other off. But I think, in my opinion, SEC championship should be considered as kind of a quarterfinal, as should the Pac-12 championship and the ACC championship. They should be they technically kind of are quarterfinal games. So if Missouri somehow beats Alabama, those Tiger fans are going to be beside themselves if we see what happens between 4 and 14, where they're ranked right now, or maybe they're 16. I know they're one of those on AP in college football rankings. But if we see what happens in between, if there's any upsets or any losses there, Tiger fans are going to be livid if they're not jumped up and in that college football playoff. But I know that Alabama fans as well, they deserve it. Strength of schedule, like you said, they might drop down to 4. But I hold a lot of stock in SEC championship game. And like you said, it's why you play a championship. It's why we're having these college football playoffs, so that these teams can play each other to see who's better. So I think whoever wins the SEC championship should be in contention to be in that college football playoff, whether it's the Rose Bowl or Sugar Bowl. But you never know. Not everyone gets what they want.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I said not everyone gets what they want, but I definitely think there will be an SEC team in the college football playoff. I couldn't imagine there not be, especially with all the SEC bias that's been going around all these rankings. I don't think that they won't have one. That would just be ridiculous because if you play any of these teams, in my opinion, Oregon, TCU, FSU, if they had even half of the SEC West schedule that Alabama has had, yeah, they shouldn't have won some of those games, some very close games that they were able to overcome. You give these teams an SEC West schedule, I don't think you would see that their record being the way they are right now. But that's just my opinion.
And you're probably right. I don't see it that way just because I don't try to conjecture that way, but you're probably right. Looking at it objectively, the big flaw for me in the whole system is we've got 5 Power 5 conferences. We got 4 slots. So before anybody kicks off on September 1st, we've got a big issue. And so they've set themselves up for controversy right out of the gate. I won't even ask you to break this down, but I was throwing out the other day, Wisconsin beats Ohio State, Georgia Tech beats Florida State, Missouri wins, Arizona wins over Oregon. You've got a blood of 2 lost teams, and that would be crazy.
And then what happens? What if Arizona beats Oregon? What if that happens? They've got a lot of momentum right now. If there's some upset in these championships, there's going to be a lot of shakeup, a lot of controversy, and like you said, they set themselves up for early controversy because if these teams start losing, then who earns the right to go into the college football playoff? You know, I mean, does Oregon drop out? Who comes in? There's a lot riding on this weekend, and we can see can see some major shakeup, controversy, and fans that are not happy.
Yeah, whatever point Arizona defeated Oregon, the next week Oregon, I don't know how far they slid. It wasn't far, and Arizona stayed in the teens. And I said, what's going on here? They're both like 6-1. Arizona not only won the game, they won it at Oregon. They play in the same conference, and you're still ranking Oregon like 10 spots ahead of Arizona, and everybody was just telling me, Arizona's no good, Arizona's no good. And I'm like, well, that's your opinion. I'm trying to stay objective on this, and here we are 6 or 8 weeks later, and Arizona's earned a Pac-12 championship game, and they get the rematch.
Yeah, I try to stay as objective as possible as well. I cover a lot of the Southeastern Conference. It's just where my opportunities have lied thus far. And I truly believe, though, looking at stats and facts and, SEC West is so strong. And going back to that Arizona-Oregon, I don't know what's going to happen in that matchup. I'm picking Oregon. I'm picking the Ducks. But if Arizona beats Oregon, I think they obviously fall out. FSU, the way that college football playoff rankings are treating them, if Georgia Tech beats them, they're out. I don't know what's going to happen with TCU. I don't think they should be in that top 4, but I don't know. Anything can happen this weekend in these rivalries, in these big games, high stake, high energy, good atmosphere. Anything can happen.
Definitely. Well, Hannah, you've alluded to a couple predictions. Florida State, Alabama, Oregon win. Have you made a pick on the Big Ten Championship or on the Baylor-Kansas State game?
I haven't. I love Baylor. I'm a big fan of Baylor, so I'm going to have to go with them. If Baylor doesn't end up in the college football playoffs, I want to see them play. I went to Ole Miss. I want to see them playing Ole Miss in the Cotton Bowl because Ole Miss defense versus Baylor offense, they're so good. I just think that would be an incredible matchup in the Cotton Bowl if they don't make it into the college football playoffs. But I'm going with Baylor on that one.
And we also have the controversy with the Ohio State quarterback situation, and what if the Buckeyes defeat Wisconsin and don't look overwhelming doing it, and they probably won't. I don't expect them to beat Wisconsin by 4 touchdowns. Then there's going to be some more debate involving that. Also, in some circles, I've heard Ohio State gets an angle because more people are going to watch Ohio State play than TCU or Baylor. And I'm not questioning character and integrity on the College Football Playoff Committee, but I've just heard rumblings that Ohio State may get an extra little shove there. All right, you make a nice little segue talking about a possible Ole Miss-Baylor matchup in the Cotton Bowl, leading into bowl projections. So a lot of people are so focused on this, they've forgotten about the bowl games. I love the bowl games. I know some of them have crazy names, and they switch cities and switch names and sponsors every 2 years. But I just love the bowl games, and I'm okay with 6-6 teams playing in bowl games. I have no issue with that. So what are your thoughts about what could possibly happen? Let's say everything kind of holds serve. Let's say your predictions are perfect for the weekend, which of course they could be, Hannah. I'm
You
trusting
never
you.
know. I tend to be right sometimes. I'm just
Once in a
joking.
while. Yeah, I tend to get a few right once in a while
Yeah.
myself. So how are the bowl projections stacking up right now for the SEC?
Well, back to the college football playoff rankings, what I would like to see in the Sugar Bowl, I believe that should be 1 and 4 would be Alabama and whoever ends up being 4. I think a cool Rose Bowl matchup would be, if all goes well, FSU Oregon. I think that would be, FSU is dying to play, teams that think that they can beat them. So I think that would be a great matchup. But looking at the SEC, Orange Bowl, Mississippi State, Georgia Tech, I think would be a great matchup if they don't beat FSU. But even if they do, I don't think I don't think Georgia Tech can get into the top 4. But I think Mississippi State, Georgia Tech be a great matchup at Orange. Like I said, Ole Miss, Baylor in the Cotton Bowl. If Missouri loses to Alabama, Mizzou, maybe Minnesota in the Citrus Bowl, and then I had one more, but Auburn versus Wisconsin in the Outback Bowl. So, I mean, obviously, we can go on for days about all these different bowls and SECs, but those are some ones that stuck out to me. What do you think?
Yeah, the SEC and the Big Ten have a long-standing rivalry in 3 bowl games, but there's an out for a Notre Dame or somebody else to slip into the Gator Bowl or whatever they're calling that these days. But yeah, you got the Citrus Bowl, you've got the Outback, and you've got the Gator with the SEC and the Big Ten. And despite the SEC being a much more dominant conference over the last 5, 6, 7 years, I would have made the argument before that the Big Ten was right there. But anyway, they actually turned out to be pretty good football games. Last year, Nebraska beat Georgia. The SEC won the other 2 games, but they were very close. South Carolina, Wisconsin, and LSU, Iowa. I love your Ole
I
Miss.
was there for that Gator Bowl.
What's
I was
that?
there for that Gator Bowl last year. I could not believe they had Georgia-Nebraska rematch. The place wasn't even half sold. There was open seats everywhere. I don't know what camera angles the cameras were getting on the fans, because my parents were watching from home and they were saying, oh, the stadium looks full. I'm like, well, that's just camera magic. This place is half empty. I don't know why they did that rematch. I covered that game last year. So let's hope the Gator Bowl doesn't do that again. I didn't write anything down for the Gator Bowl. I don't have a prediction for that one yet.
Well, I would guess Nebraska is going to be in the mix for that. I've seen Nebraska Ole Miss in a game. Again, there's 4 or 5 teams that could slot into those games. That must have been camera magic, because being a TV guy for a long time, I'm usually pretty savvy to that. From my remembrance of that game, I thought the place was packed as well.
Yeah, no, it was real, but it was also raining. I think that they did sell a lot of tickets, but it was pouring rain down the sidelines. It was getting really nasty. But yeah, it was about half full. I mean, even right at kickoff, we're all like, "Where are the fans?" So
yeah, the SEC and the Big Ten have slotted in those 3 bowl games for so long. Not so long the Gator, but the other 2 that we start to get some repeats, and it may need to get shaken up just a bit. South Carolina and Nebraska played a couple times, and yeah, we've had some rematches in those games. But I love your Ole Miss Baylor. That would be a must-see game for me as well. That would be really good. Mississippi State, Georgia Tech with the Yellow Jackets really hot down the stretch. That should be a good one as well. All right, Hannah, I think we pretty much covered the bowl games. It's so much up in the air at this point. I don't know where we can go with this, but I love your thoughts on the college football rankings, and I don't want to speak for you, but the Florida State rationale I have, just to close that part of the discussion down, is it's not that I think that they're the best team in the country. I'm separating what I see and what I think versus just the objectivity of them winning all the games. So don't think Florida State's the best team in the country. Do think they should be ranked number 1.
Number 1? I don't know about number 1. I like them at 2. Florida State.
I put them number 1. Alabama's not even my number 2. They're number 3. I think Oregon's playing on the schedule.
Okay.
I don't see a Michigan State on Alabama's schedule. I think the SEC is the best conference, but I think it's that close with the Pac-12. I think it's pretty tight, and I would give Oregon on the strength of the Michigan State game over Alabama's West Virginia non-conference game. I'd give Oregon again.
Mm-hmm.
If they play tomorrow on a neutral field and I've got to put up the mortgage on my house, I put it on Alabama. But if I'm just ranking them, trying to be as objective as possible, I like Oregon in that one.
But the Pac-12 and the Big Ten and the Big 12, they need to thank the SEC West, in my opinion, for beating up on each other. Ole Miss upsetting Mississippi State, that knocks them out. Otherwise, they're still in the top 4. And
haven't the other conferences done that as well, though?
Yeah, but still, I still think that there would be 2 SEC teams right now in the top 4 if Ole Miss doesn't beat Mississippi State in the Egg Bowl.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate, Hannah. If you look at the Pac-12 South, USC, UCLA, Arizona State, USC lost a non-conference game. The other 3, they knocked out their non-conference games against teams like Texas and some pretty decent teams, Notre Dame. They only beat each other. So it's pretty much the same thing happened there. It just didn't get as much attention.
Yeah.
The issue I have with the scheduling is that, follow me here, that the SEC's got 14 teams. They play 4 non-conference games. That's 56 games. They play the Power 5 11 times. They played 11 games with the other Power 4 conferences out of 56 times 11. We need more.
But you can also say it for the other way around, though. We're only getting a couple of non-conference games. If we had more non-conference, if the SEC had more non-conference games, those other conferences might be having more L's on their records.
Well, that's only speculation, though. We don't know that. I'm just saying that, and I'm not just picking on the SEC. This is pretty much every conference, although the other conferences did play more games against each other than the SEC. 11 out of 56. 56 opportunities to schedule Power 5. You play 11. That's just, I think, crazy. Mississippi State played no one. Ole Miss played no one.
Yeah, their out-of-conference games are always not always, a lot of time cupcake games, but you have to credit Georgia. They always take on Clemson in their first game of the season, and that's a huge matchup. It's gone 2 different ways, back-to-back. Both seasons, Georgia lost last season. They won this year just because the home field advantage, and they had that new speaker system. It was loud in there. But credit to Georgia. They always do that really tough game right off the bat. And that, if with an L, a loss, like they did last season, that messed up the momentum for the entire season, starting out with 1 loss against a tough team like that. But a lot of cupcake games. I mean, you are right.
Yeah, any of those teams in the SEC East, like Florida that plays Florida State, Georgia plays Georgia Tech, and South Carolina Clemson, when they schedule another toughie, I very much credit them in doing so. South Carolina did that a couple of years ago. They played North Carolina, Central Florida, and Clemson. And like you mentioned, Georgia playing Georgia Tech at the end of the year, Clemson at the beginning of the year. Those are 2 fairly heavyweights, so much credit to them. All right, Hannah Chalker just finished up another season with Mercer Football on ESPN3. You can catch her on the SEC Fans Radio Network, so that's secradionetwork.com. And Hannah, we appreciate the time. It was good.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I know we don't agree on everything, but that's how it goes in this crazy world. Huh?
That's what makes it fun.
Yes. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much, Hannah.